I'm David from AWS. We're in London for This Is My Architecture. I'm joined today by Greg from Starling Bank. Hi, Greg.
How are you doing?
Great, thanks very much for coming in. So tell us a little bit about Starling Bank.
So Starling Bank are a startup bank. We are digital-only, mobile-only bank with debit cards, direct debits, faster payments, the things you'd expect of a bank. We also have an open API, so we're banking as a platform, if you like. If you want to implement your latest fintech idea on top of Starling Bank, then you're welcome.
Well, I might give that a try. But we're here today to talk about how you've got a Slack-based privilege escalation process. Now, can you maybe give us an overview of what that involves?
Sure. So our core environment, which we'll draw at the bottom, let's call it prod, is quite traditional in being an EC2 and RDS-based implementation of Starling Bank. But there are various capabilities that engineers might need with respect to this environment that aren't standing access. So occasionally we might need to do some debugging or diagnostics in the environment, which shouldn't be allowed generally. Or even if we're doing a deployment, which is usually just triggering a Lambda that automates the whole process, we don't want people to be able to do that without explicit sign-off. Yeah. So we use a Slack bot to cover these moments where we need to do escalated privileges.
Let's imagine that you're the developer. How would that process work for him?
So it looks very simple. I'm in a Slack channel. I can type starbot grant me deployer in prod in this instance. And the chatbot goes away, looks at the IAM privileges you have, assigns some more based on who you are and whether you're able to do it, and then simply paints those roles onto your user, if you like. So the Lambda which implements this uses IAM to check permissions and to alter permissions and then give you the access you need in prod.
So let me make sure I understood this. So I've typed something into Slack. The Lambda takes my request effectively and then enhances the permissions that I've got so that I can go and assume a role in the production account where I need it to have access.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So how does it link up with Slack in the first place?
So the first point is that the Slack bot itself, Starbot, is a Docker container running in Elastic Beanstalk, which is logged into Slack. And that interprets the command. That is then passed to Lambda via API gateway, and then the Lambda can do the various bits of logic that it needs to implement the command.
Okay, now how about authentication? So I'm calling via API gateway. How do you secure that side of things?
Well, there's a few points in which we need to be careful. First off, it's worth pointing out that there's multi-factor authentication in 2 points. And then the call into API gateway, which would otherwise be public, is authenticated using an API key, which is generated by API.
So I've called through API gateway and got to Lambda, and I've managed to get the access I need and carried out the modifications. But what about keeping a track of what I've been doing? In a regulated environment, it's really important to keep a log of these things.
Sure, not just keeping a track, but timing out as well. One of the worst things would be if we escalated everyone's privileges and they never got revoked, and next thing you know, everyone's got the privileges. So a couple of things to point out. One is we've actually got CloudWatch sitting here with various triggers, and those triggers are calling into the Lambda, which enable it to check timestamps to implement the timeout. And that session information itself is stored in DynamoDB for the duration of the session.
So that's really transparent. So everybody logged into Slack can see exactly who's logged in, when, and when it was revoked.
Yeah, and that's one of the key points of this, is it's highly visible.
But how about keeping a track of that activity then?
So obviously to do that, we need to store state, which we do in Dynamo for the duration of that session.
Got it. So what about KMS? Where does that come into play?
So we use KMS to encrypt various bits of configuration which are required by the Lambda. One of those, for instance, is the Slack callback URL, but there are other bits and pieces as well.
So you're keeping track of the session information, what's been going on in Dynamo, but what about longer-term archival for audit or regulatory compliance purposes?
Yeah. So like many fintechs in AWS, we operate a multi-account structure. There is a user's account where the users log into, and then they assume roles in the other accounts, be that production, non-production, etc. We also have an account called logging, which is for write-only logging. So audit information goes into that account and is never updated. We protect it very heavily. We have MFA on delete and versioning in S3 buckets and similar. And that's where all this information ends up. And the only people with read access to that are people with an audit capability.
Got it. So it sounds like you've got it all wrapped up. And not only that, it's largely serverless as well, I see.
Absolutely. The only place where you might say there's a server is up here, and that's just because we're using WhoBot, the GitHub open source bot engine, to implement the bot.
Perfect. What about the future? Any plans?
Oh, many plans. So there are various things that we've automated or semi-automated using Lambda. Not all of those are exposed yet through the chatbot. For instance, if I, in an emergency or something, need operating system access to production machines, well, there's no way in by default. To do that, I need to create a single-use key pair, use that to bring up some Bastion machines, and then tunnel through those Bastion machines. That whole process is managed by Lambda, which can bring those up. But the ability to do that has not yet been made available via Starbot. But again, it's something we want to be highly visible to anyone if that's happening.
I love it. Well, great pattern. Well, thanks very much for coming in and taking us through it, Greg.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching This Is My Architecture.